This is Livy. In 2019, she was 22. If you had visited her Instagram that year, you would have seen what psychologists call the peak of the mountain. Sunsets, travel, a grin from ear to ear, and captions like "Life is beautiful" or "A moment of happiness." The average viewer would say, some people have all the luck living the dream. But the truth, as always, lies beneath the frame. In 2024, Harvard and Baylor University published a study that should have made us all stop in our tracks. They surveyed over 200,000 people across 22 countries, and they discovered something terrifying. The familiar happiness curve, very young and full of hope, is broken. Today, people aged 18 to 29 feel worse than their parents did during the midlife crisis. Livy was a part of this statistic. While her photos were racking up likes in cozy cafes, in reality, she was working 3 jobs, renting a room with mold on the ceiling, and couldn't afford a visit to a therapist. But she was smiling. And here arises the central question of our investigation. Why does a generation that objectively live worse, with less purchasing power, worse housing prospects, escalating anxiety, why does it look happier than ever before? This is not a video about young people being whiners. This is a video about how all of us have fallen into a trap. Let's turn on the scalpel mode and set aside emotions. Let's start with the numbers, because numbers don't lie. They simply state the facts of death. Before us stands a generation that economists have already dubbed the first generation that will live worse than their parents. In the US and Europe, the rate of housing inflation over the last 20 years has grown 78% faster than the income of young professionals. Let's take a concrete example. 1985. A young man with a bachelor's degree moves to New York. He spends 25% of his salary on rent. He can save, he can plan. 2026. Same degree, same profession, same apartment. Now, rent consumes 55% of his salary. He has no money left for savings, none for a mortgage. He lives paycheck to paycheck. He is a working poor. The picture in Russia is no better. Sociologists at the Platforma Center conducted a large-scale study of new generation. Their conclusion: a generation of comfort has emerged. But this comfort is illusory. 62% of surveyed teenagers stated they want to earn a lot of money. Yet, At the same time, their drive for leadership and extraordinary effort is catastrophically low. How can you earn a lot without making an effort? The answer: you can't. So they get stuck in the gap between the ambitions that Instagram drilled into them and the reality that offers them a job as a delivery driver. By 2025, studies confirm Generation Z is more susceptible to anxiety for 3 reasons: hyper-awareness of mental health issues, endless self-analysis, and social media. But social media isn't just a cause, it's the only refugee. And here we arrive at the most interesting part: the gap between objective reality and the subjective image. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. I call it the rules of the survival game. If you live worse than your parents did, you have 2 paths. The first, take to the street in protest. The second, create a virtual reality when you are happy. The second is easier. We see this everywhere. Remember 2021 and the GameStop case. Thousands of young people sitting in their basement united against hedge funds. They weren't fighting for justice in the real world. They moved the battle onto stock charts. It was a revolution inside a phone. They looked happy. They felt part of something great. They were winning, and then the market crashed, and most were left with nothing. But the emotion of happiness in that moment, it was there. Another mechanism, the digital facade. Take Livy, the one we started with. Her Instagram isn't an attempt to show life. It's an attempt to convince yourself that life has worked out. When you can't buy an apartment, you buy a $7 cup of coffee, place it against the only clean corner in your rented room, and write, "Coffee with a view of happiness." Social media becomes a narrative shield. They create what psychologists call the hidden generation. The Platforma study revealed something frightening. Today's teenagers are arguably polite, but they're hidden. Their main principle: I'll say what you want to hear, but you never know what I actually think. We look at this generation and see smiles, but beneath them, numbness. Or, quoting the Harvard study, a lack of life purpose in more than half of those surveyed. Historical materialism teaches when a class becomes aware of its oppression, it reaches for the pitchforks. But why, in 2026, are the pitchforks just angry comments on TikTok? Why are there no barricades? Because the barricades are elsewhere now. First, Generation Z and Alpha are children of the digital age. They didn't grow up in the yards, they grew up on the internet. Their battlefield is the screen. They don't seize factories, they seize trends. Second, a mechanism I call the placebo effect of happiness has kicked in. We were sold the idea that happiness is accessible. that all you need is to buy a Netflix subscription, order a burger, and hit like, and you're already part of the good life. It's cheap compensation. You don't need to fight for a decent salary if cheap dopamine from your feed is available. You don't need to change the world if you can just change your avatar. And the third reason, the most frightening one, they don't believe it can get better. Researchers at Baylor University note, Generation Z sees no purpose in life, not because they're stupid, but because they're too smart. They see the climate crisis, they see political conflicts, they see AI taking their future jobs. Why fight for a place in the sun if the sun, according to forecast, is about to burn out? So, we arrived at the solution to the paradox. Why does a new generation live worse but look happier? Because looking happy has become a job. They cannot afford to be unhappy in the public sphere. Unhappiness is a privilege of the losers. And in an era where everyone is their own brand, losing is not an option. They live in worse economic conditions than their parents did in the 80s. They take out more loans, they move out from their parents' homes later, they suffer from depression more often. But on their face a mask of calm, success, and ease. Because tearing off the mask would mean admitting that the system has won. Livy, the one we started with, she's still posting photos, she's still smiling, but recently a strange phrase appeared in her caption, a quote. She wrote, "Is it just me, or is silence louder than music?" We are not asking why they smile. We should be asking, what happens in those 10 minutes after the camera turns off?